In a city where the elite crossed paths on the cobbled streets, every corner seemed to be an echo of a world where appearances and privilege dictated the rules. The Heart of Opulence was not just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary of luxury where wealth was measured by the finesse of the service and the perfection of the dishes. The customers who passed through its doors were influential people. Real estate moguls, high society investors, celebrities, and even politicians. It was a place where distinction mixed with elegance, where the murmur of discreet, almost conspiratorial conversations mingled with the subtle sounds of ambient music. The restaurant was decked out in gilt, its polished marble tables reflecting the light of the sparkling chandeliers, creating an almost otherworldly atmosphere. But behind this dazzling decor hid a much more human reality. The walls of the Heart of Opulence bore traces of the hard work of invisible staff, who, day after day, worked in the shadows to offer these customers impeccable service. Their lives, marked by fatigue and endless hours, were far from the illusion of grandeur that reigned in this place. Every smile, every gesture, every detail of their service was a silent offering, and yet their work often went unnoticed. Marta, however, was one of those employees who stood out. She was one of the restaurant's most respected waitresses, not only for her skill, but also for her ability to maintain an unwavering calm in the face of pressures. Her temperament, both calm and determined, made her unique. As a professional, she knew her role was not only to serve perfectly cooked food, but also to create ambience. Every look she exchanged with a customer, every smile she offered was designed to establish a connection, a kind of silent communion between service and customer. She had learned to make everyone feel at home, while maintaining unalterable dignity, even when customers didn't always treat her as an equal. That evening, like so many others, Marta walked the corridors of the restaurant, ensuring that every table was perfectly served, every detail adjusted with care. But one table in particular caught his attention. Lucia, a businesswoman in her 30s, had just taken a seat in one of the best seats in the restaurant, overlooking the central fountain. His imposing appearance, his sharp gaze and his exaggerated gestures betrayed his desire to dominate the stage. Lucia was not just a customer, she was a well-known figure in high society, a businesswoman who openly boasted of her real estate acquisitions, risky investments in exotic businesses, and dozens of projects under her belt. The aura of wealth that surrounded him seemed to crush everything in its path. His friends, who accompanied him that evening, were just as influential, dressed in expensive suits and adorned with flashy watches and jewelry. The atmosphere around their table exuded arrogance. The conversation revolved around their latest acquisitions and how they were maneuvering the business world to amass even more power and money. Lucia boasted about the latest properties she had purchased, real estate complexes in Asia and Eastern Europe, where risky investments were multiplying. With every word, she projected a feeling of superiority, as if the whole world belonged to her. His gaze sometimes crossed the room, scanning the other customers with barely concealed disdain. The others, almost intimidated, moved out of his way, as if his presence imposed a form of respect by default. When Marta arrived at the table to take the order, she didn't have to look long to catch Lucia's attitude. A simple exchange of glances is enough to understand that this customer was not just looking for a good meal, but an opportunity to get noticed. Lucia didn't even look at her directly, just glanced absently at Marta, as if she were a mere accessory in the rush of her own preoccupations. "What do you recommend?" Lucia asked in an authoritative voice, her eyes focused on her cell phone, without even deigning to look at Marta. "Madam, we have a selection of dishes specially prepared for tonight," Marta replied gently, trying to get her attention. "Our chef recommends the beef fillet with truffles, as well as the homemade chocolate mousse." Lucia barely looked up before blurting, "That's it, but I hope everything will be perfect."
You know, I don't like wasting my time with mediocre meals.
"It's not like I'm used to eating at places like this." Marta felt her heart grow heavy. These kinds of clients were difficult to deal with, but she knew there was only one way to deal with them, calmly and professionally. She took orders from Lucia and her guests, but when she was about to leave, Lucia said in a cold tone,
"And don't keep me waiting too long.
It looks like you're too busy running around to take care of me."
I hope your service isn't as bad as your attitude.
Marta, while maintaining her calm, bowed slightly and walked away, but an unpleasant shiver ran down her spine. Lucia's icy gaze had remained engraved on him, like an indelible mark. She knew that this client was not the type to settle for simple inconveniences. Lucia seemed to feed off the injustice she inflicted on others, using every little weakness as a weapon. Marta felt a heaviness in her heart, as if a storm was threatening to break, but she didn't let it show. She headed towards the kitchen, where the atmosphere was already tense. The focused chefs worked tirelessly to satisfy the demands of demanding customers, but tonight the atmosphere seemed even more electric than usual. The heat of the stoves contrasted with the icy cold she carried within her. In the kitchen, a breath of fresh air seemed to free her momentarily from Lucia's sharp gaze. She leaned briefly on a counter, letting her thoughts settle, breathing deeply. "Are you okay, Marta?" asked one of the leaders, a young man with features drawn from pressure. "Lucia is difficult, but you know the game." Marta nodded, a professional smile on her lips. "I'll take care of it, don't worry." But deep down, she knew she was going to have to face more than just dissatisfaction that night. The minutes passed slowly. The dishes were served at an almost hypnotic speed, but every time Marta approached Lucia's table, something seemed to go off the rails. The wine was never at the right temperature. The presentation of the salad was not refined enough. Even the bread, although impeccably served, did not meet the customer's expectations. But what could have been harmless criticism turned into scathing attacks. Then came the fateful moment. The main course, a carefully cooked fillet of beef enhanced with fresh truffles, arrived at the table. Marta knew that she had put all her know-how into preparing for this service, but she did not expect what was going to happen. Lucia, visibly disappointed, examined her plate with contemptuous coldness. She took a piece of meat, placed it on her plate, looked at it for a second, then, with a theatrical gesture, said, her voice full of disdain, "But it's a shame. I asked you to cook this to perfection, and this is what you've brought me? You're just a cleaning lady in uniform. You don't understand anything about gastronomy." A heavy silence fell over the room. The other customers, although embarrassed, remained silent, their eyes wide, unsure of how to react to such public humiliation. Murmurs began to circulate, but no one dared to intervene. Lucia's words were invisible but fiercely precise blows, and Marta, overwhelmed, felt the blush of shame invade her cheeks. His body trembled imperceptibly, but his face remained impassive. She tried not to let anger or sadness seep into her voice. "I am deeply sorry, ma'am. Please allow me to have this rectified immediately," she replied, her voice calm but marked by a slight tremor. She walked away quickly, but deep inside, a whirlwind of feelings overwhelmed her.
Scham, frustration, anger.
Everything was mixed up inside her, but she tried to leave it all behind as she entered the kitchen. She walked towards the cooks, but before she could even speak, a deep, authoritative voice sounded behind her, interrupting the scene. "I think it's time to remind this lady what respect is." Everyone turned their heads when they heard the deep and authoritative voice. Tomás Fernández, the restaurant's owner, stood there, calm and imposing, in the shadows of a corner of the room. Although he was the heart of the establishment, he was not a man who appeared in public often. He preferred to keep a low profile, managing matters behind the scenes, monitoring every detail of the restaurant, ensuring that the service was impeccable, while avoiding drawing the spotlight on himself. Perfection was his signature, but he also knew when to step up to defend his principles. Tonight, he couldn't ignore the blatant humiliation inflicted on Marta, an employee he deeply respected. This time he wouldn't stay in the shadows. Lucia, who did not immediately recognize Tomás, turned towards him with a look that was both haughty and contemptuous. She took a quick look at his costume, distinguished but not ostentatious, and at his calm face, which she judged to be uninteresting. In his mind, a person like him couldn't be in a position to give him orders, especially in this type of restaurant. "And you're supposed to be?" she asked in a condescending tone, as if the mere idea that a man like him could have any authority over her was laughable. Tomás held her gaze, his eyes a cold steel blue like the ocean. He was not the type to be intimidated or give in to anger, but his look expressed all the respect he demanded in return. "I am the owner of this restaurant," he replied calmly, without getting angry. "And I advise you to rethink your behavior before this becomes more embarrassing." Lucia, visibly unimpressed, burst out laughing. She shook her head, convinced it was just a bad joke. "You, the owner," she said, laughing even harder. "Come on, you don't seem to fit the image of this place." She made a dismissive gesture, sweeping her gaze around him, as if to say that he wasn't doing the job. She expected him to withdraw, ashamed of having dared to speak to her like that. But Tomas, far from letting himself be destabilized, slowly approached the table. He was neither particularly tall nor particularly impressive in stature, but he had the rare ability to immediately capture the attention of an entire room simply by his presence. His calm seemed unshakable, his charisma natural. As he walked towards Lucia, the entire room froze. The murmurs died away, eyes were fixed on him. The customers and staff then understood that this moment would mark a turning point in the evening. Tomas stopped a few steps from the table, and his gaze, still piercing, remained fixed on Lucia. He didn't shout, he didn't make dramatic gestures, he didn't need that. His authority was manifested in the simplicity of his words, in the solidity of his attitude. His tone was firm, but measured, a perfect blend of calm and power. "I suggest you apologize to this young lady, madam," he said, each word carefully weighed, like a well-sharpened blade. "And I advise you to do it quickly, before it becomes more embarrassing." Lucia, stunned and paralyzed by the situation, tried to respond, but her words caught in her throat. The air suddenly felt heavier, each breath becoming an effort. The gazes of the other customers, at first curious, then full of silent judgment, weighed on her, and she realized, with unexpected brutality, that she had no defense against Tomas' calm authority. In this room, the money and social status she wore like armor seemed useless. The silence, almost palpable, enveloped him. There was no mocking laughter or murmurs of indignation, just a heavy void where shame took root. The laughter she had heard before, so full of confidence and superiority, now seemed distant, like an echo from another world, a world that had just collapsed. She tried to stand up, to regain her composure, but the paralysis of the situation prevented her from acting. Every muscle seemed to freeze in a sort of torpor, each movement seeming more difficult than the last. She tried to find a way out, to turn the situation around, but there was no escape. His eyes, normally full of pride and contempt, now shone with palpable uncertainty. In this room, she was no longer the difficult client to whom everything was owed, but a simple woman, fragile and vulnerable, faced with the relentless judgment of others. I'm sorry," she finally whispered, but her voice was weak, almost inaudible. The words, although simple, seemed almost foreign to her mouth, as if she had never learned to pronounce them in such an authentic moment. His face, already red with embarrassment, turned even redder, and his eyes avoided Tomas's, desperately searching for a corner of shadow in which to hide. But there wasn't any. She felt exposed, helpless, trapped in a moment where everyone seemed to be watching her, where the rules of superiority that she had so maintained were suddenly undermined. The forced humility she had to show in front of everyone only reinforced her feeling of defeat. Tomas, for his part, remained implacably calm. He didn't need to boo or belittle Lucia any further, because the scene itself was enough to convey the full dimension of the situation. His eyes, however piercing and cold, turned towards Marta, who remained frozen behind, her trembling hands still clenched on her apron. Marta had not moved, and her posture, humble but dignified, spoke for itself. She had endured the humiliation without letting herself be broken, and in this simplicity, she embodied everything that Tomas respected. It was not an act of greatness for her, but an act of survival, of dignity in a world where respect seemed rare. "Marta," he then said in a softer voice, but full of great firmness, "you have all my gratitude. This is the respect you deserve, and you should never have to put up with this kind of attitude. No one here, neither in this restaurant, nor anywhere else, should allow themselves to treat you like this." Marta's eyes brightened slightly, but a deep humility, mixed with tangible relief, could be read in her eyes. She had always believed in the value of her work, but she had never imagined that a man like Tomas would come to her defense with so much sincerity. It was recognition she hadn't sought, but received nonetheless, and it spoke volumes about how he viewed his team. This recognition went beyond a simple gesture. It was a validation of her dignity as an individual, a validation she had never received from a client like Lucia. Lucia, still in shock, hurriedly stood up, her posture tense, her facial features frozen in a red expression of shame. She didn't even dare to take a last look at Marta, nor at Tomas. Without another word, she hurried out of the restaurant, her sharp heel hitting the floor with unnecessary aggression, a final burst of wounded pride. The murmur of the customers who had observed the scene gradually dissipated, but a new energy floated in the air. There was no ovation, but a form of tacit respect that permeated the room. A respect for the way Tomas had managed the situation and, above all, for the dignity he had protected. Tomas then turned his gaze towards Marta, who was still standing there, more serene but visibly marked by the event. A sincere, almost imperceptible smile appeared on his lips. "You're doing a great job here," he said with unexpected warmth in his voice. "Never let anyone make you feel like you are less than that." The words, simple but profound, resonated in Marta's mind. For the first time, she felt that her work was truly seen and appreciated, not only for the quality of service, but also for her own value as an individual. She nodded, a small glimmer of emotion shining in her eyes, touched by this gesture of recognition. That evening, the restaurant remained not only a place of luxury and sophistication, but also a symbol of respect, justice, and integrity. It was no longer just about satisfying customers, but about protecting those who worked there, giving them the dignity they deserved, far from the humiliations of arrogant customers. The evening continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The customers, witnesses to what had just happened, exchanged sidelong glances, a sort of silent solidarity woven among them. The restaurant had become a living example of what true hospitality should be, not simply impeccable service, but a place where people are valued above prestige. Tomas, once again, had shown that, in his establishment, respect took precedence over everything else.